You step into the lobby before the city has fully settled into the day. The floor is polished. The security desk is quiet. A badge reader flashes green, and the elevator opens without ceremony. Around you, people move through glass corridors, speaking softly about numbers large enough to reshape companies, move markets, and change entire industries. From the outside, Wall Street looks like a place where smart people make extraordinary money. But inside, it is colder than that, more precise. It is a permission system. At the bottom, you are allowed to see information. Then you are trusted to protect it. Then you are allowed to move a process forward. Later, you enter the room. Then you bring opportunities into the room. Then you own outcomes, allocate capital, and eventually help design the structures that decide where money can move. So the real question is not simply how much you make. The real question is what part of the system you are allowed to touch. Level 1. The observer. At the lowest level, you are close enough to see the machine, but not close enough to move it. Information passes through you constantly. A company considering a sale, a buyer testing how much debt the business can carry, a lender asking whether the cash flow is stable enough, a valuation shifting because one assumption changes slightly. You see the pieces, assets, liabilities, margins, leverage, ownership, risk, but none of it belongs to you. That is the first quiet rule of the system. At the bottom, you are not paid to decide. You are paid to make sure information arrives clean, organized, and usable. You exist so the people above you can make decisions without feeling the friction underneath them. And that makes this level strange. You are near enormous transactions, but invisible to them. You can see how capital moves, but you cannot direct it. You start to recognize the language of power before you are allowed to speak it. At first, proximity feels important. Then you learn the difference. Proximity is not power. The limit is simple. You are allowed to look at the numbers, but not to say what the numbers should make anyone do. Level 2. The gatekeeper of accuracy. If you remain precise long enough, the system gives you a different kind of trust. You are no longer only handling information. You are protecting it. This is not power in the obvious sense. No one waits for your final judgment. No one changes strategy because you have spoken. But a quiet responsibility has moved closer to you. A small error can damage the confidence of an entire room. One weak assumption, one comparison that does not hold up, one number that cannot survive a serious question, and the mood changes. Not because the deal is finished, but because trust has been disturbed. So your first real authority is defensive. You are not deciding where capital goes. You are making sure capital is not guided by something false. That gives you more control, but only inside narrow walls. You understand the transaction better than before. You can see why certain choices matter. You can sense which parts of the story are fragile. But you still do not own the relationship. You do not control the client. You do not create the opportunity. You do not decide where the deal should go. You are trusted with logic. And once you prove you can protect logic, the system gives you something more dangerous to protect next. The process. Level 3. The process holder. At this level, you are no longer protecting information alone. You are protecting motion. From far away, a transaction can look solid. There is a buyer, a seller, a price, a reason. Enough professional confidence around it to make the outcome feel almost inevitable. But inside the system, almost nothing is inevitable. A deal can slow because one party stops responding quickly. It can weaken because one sentence in an agreement becomes unclear. It can lose momentum because a lender grows cautious, a committee hesitates, or someone decides the risk is no longer worth the reputation attached to it. This is what you begin to understand. Deals rarely die all at once. They die when trust leaks out of the chain. So people start calling you when something feels unstable, not because you own the capital, not because you created the opportunity, but because you know where the weak points are. You know who is waiting, who is nervous, who needs certainty, and which delay is harmless compared with which delay is a warning. That is a new kind of importance, but it is conditional. You become visible when the system is under pressure. When everything works, you almost disappear again. The limit is clear. You can keep a deal alive, but you did not create the deal. You coordinate other people's authority. You do not yet possess your own. And if you hold the process together long enough, something changes. People outside your firm begin to remember your name. That is when you are invited closer. Level 4, the room participant. At this level, the conversation changes. The room is no longer only about whether the numbers work. The numbers still matter, but they are not the center of gravity anymore. Now the conversation moves toward timing, reputation, financing conditions, strategic pressure, and what happens if the decision is wrong. You begin to hear how people with real capital speak. They do not obsess over a single figure. They ask what that figure means under stress. They ask who else is moving. They ask whether the window is open now and whether it will still be open later. This is access. You are no longer outside the room. You are close enough to hear strategy before it becomes public action. But access is not authority. You may be invited into the conversation, but you are not yet the reason the conversation exists. You can understand the logic. You can feel the pressure. You may even shape small pieces of the discussion, but you do not control the source of opportunity. The next level begins when you stop merely entering the room and become the person who causes the room to gather. Level 5, the originator. At this level, you are no longer waiting for a transaction to arrive. You are the reason it begins. The system now measures you differently, not by how clean your work is, not by how calmly you manage pressure, not by how well you explain a decision someone else has already made. You are measured by what you can bring in: opportunity, trust, attention, revenue. This is the level where relationship becomes infrastructure. A founder calls before deciding whether to sell. A private equity partner asks what you are seeing in the market. A board member wants to know who else might be interested before the process becomes visible to everyone else. Your power is not that you know more than every person in the room. Your power is that people with assets call you before they call the market. That is deal flow. And deal flow is one of the quietest forms of control on Wall Street. Whoever controls the flow of opportunity controls where the firm pays attention. Analysts can build around it. Committees can debate it. Capital providers can respond to it. But first, the opportunity has to enter the system. And now, you are one of the doors. From the outside, this level looks freer. You are treated with more respect. Your calendar belongs more to clients than to internal managers. You are not watched in the same obvious way. But the pressure has only changed shape. There is an invisible quota attached to your relationships. You must keep bringing value back. The people you know are no longer just a network. They become living inventory. Trust becomes an asset you carry, maintain, and constantly risk. The limit is that you may generate enormous revenue, but you are still generating it for a larger platform. You have access, reputation, client trust, but much of the upside still belongs somewhere else. to the institution behind you, and to the people who own the assets being bought, sold, financed, and restructured. This is the turning point. Advising capital can make you wealthy. Owning assets changes the game. The advisory side is paid when a transaction happens. The ownership side is paid if the asset becomes more valuable over time. One side stands near the flow of capital. The other side sits on what capital is trying to buy. So the next level is not just a higher title in the same system. It is a move to the other side of the table, where you no longer only help others decide, you begin to own the consequences of the decision. Level 6. The owner of outcomes. At this level, the company is no longer something you discuss from the outside. You now have a position in what happens to it. You look at the business differently. Not as a story, not as a presentation, but as a system of cash flow, debt capacity, pricing power, incentives, costs, and exit routes. Every part of the company connects to a financial consequence. A hiring plan is not only a hiring plan, it affects margins. A new location is not only expansion, it changes risk. A debt structure is not only financing, it changes how much pressure the business can survive. This is ownership. You are no longer paid only to interpret the asset. You are paid to improve it, reshape it, or extract value from it. The decisions become more real because they do not end in a meeting. They move into operations, payroll, strategy, and the future of people who may never know your name. That is the emotional distance of this level. The power is clearer, but the human consequence is farther away. You have more control than before, but control also creates separation. You begin to see companies through structure before you see them through people. The limit is that even ownership is not complete freedom. Much of the capital is still entrusted to you by someone else. You answer to fund life, return targets, investor expectations, exit pressure, and the quiet mathematics of time. The asset may be yours to influence, but the clock belongs to the fund. And once you manage enough outcomes, the question changes. It is no longer only which company should be owned, it is where capital should go. Level 7. The allocator. At this level, you stop thinking one transaction at a time. You begin thinking in weight. How much exposure should go into private credit? How much into infrastructure? How much into real estate, public markets, energy, technology, or a region most investors ignore until money has already arrived there? Capital at this scale is no longer just money. It becomes weather. When it moves into an industry, financing becomes easier. Hiring becomes easier. Expansion becomes easier. Valuations rise before the public understands why. When it leaves, the opportunity may still exist, but the oxygen disappears. This level appears calm from the outside. The language is measured, the rooms are quiet, the decisions are written in allocation memos, risk reviews, and committee notes. But the weight is real. One decision can affect companies, cities, workers, pensioners, and investors you will never meet. The limit is mandate. You can allocate capital, but not without boundaries. Committees, liquidity needs, policy limits, reputation risk, and institutional promises all shape the path. The next level does not merely decide where capital goes inside a mandate. It designs the mandate itself. Level 8. The structure designer. At the highest level, the work becomes almost invisible. There may be no large room, no public announcement, no dramatic moment where the world realizes something has changed. It may be a small meeting with no logo on the wall, a family office presentation, a legal counsel sitting quietly at the table, a holding company chart, a trust document, a fund vehicle, a cross-border structure that only a few people fully understand. This is where power becomes less about action and more about design. You are no longer trying to win a trade. You are not simply closing a transaction. You are not even just deciding where capital should go inside an existing mandate. You are helping build the container that capital will live inside. At this level, every word matters differently. Structure, exposure, control, tax, succession, jurisdiction, liquidity, continuity. These are not technical details anymore. They are the architecture of wealth. The emotional truth is quiet. Your influence may be larger than it has ever been, but your world becomes narrower. You no longer need public attention. You do not need applause. You do not need most people to understand what you do. And over time, they cannot. The higher you move, the fewer people can describe your role clearly. The work becomes cleaner, quieter, and more isolated. You design structures, but the structures begin to design you back. They shape your conversations, your risks, your relationships, and even the way you see the world. This is the final inversion. Not everyone who works on Wall Street controls Wall Street. Not everyone who earns a large income owns the game. Not everyone with a powerful title designs the path capital follows. The highest level does not need to be loud, because it is not selling the feeling of success to the public. It only needs to shape the rails that money will move across. And once you see that, Wall Street looks different. It is not only a ladder of ambition. It is a hierarchy of access, ownership, incentives, mandates, and structure. If you want to understand wealth, do not look only at income. Look at who touches the asset. Look at who owns the outcome. Look at who writes the mandate. And finally, look at who designs the structure everyone else has to move through.